Good morning, everyone. And to folks on the live stream, good evening, good afternoon, or just about good night. As Crystal mentioned, my name is Naina, and I'm a product manager on the AMP project. I'm incredibly honored, nervous, and excited to be here today to talk to you about how engineering teams can best use AMP to really accelerate their workflow while making the correct decisions for their users. Now, we know why AMP makes sense for a user. AMP helps engineering teams create an inclusive space for their users, regardless of device specs, network connectivity, or geographic location. And Kat and Vamsi just highlighted why AMP makes sense for businesses and how it helps them increase their revenue. But what I'm here to talk to you about is why AMP makes sense for engineering teams. Now, as the numbers of frameworks increase, engineers are often put into the position of picking a technology that best sets them up for success. This involves picking something that is easy to get started with, easy to maintain in the short term, and one that helps reduce the burden of long-term maintenance. And we believe that AMP is that well-lit path that allows engineering teams to make the best decisions for their users. And much like any other software as a service, by using AMP, engineering teams can really help accelerate their workflow. Now, to better understand how AMP can help you as an engineering team create a great product, let's look at a product lifecycle. First, the product, engineering, and UX teams will get together in a room to create and then validate their minimum viable product. And then, based on those results, these teams will work on the MVP to then migrate it to a fully viable and validated product. This means they have to ensure that they retain the value of the MVP while also providing users with a great experience. And once the product is out to market, engineers will spend a large part of their time doing long-term maintenance. This includes fixing bugs, releasing new iterative features, or just dealing with growing tech debt. And during the rest of my talk, I'm going to walk through the different stages of a product and convince you that AMP can be a great solution as your product moves from one stage to another. So let's get started. Now, as a team, when you're kicking off a new project and picking the set of technologies to use, you're trying to look for something that can help you prototype and iterate on feedback really quickly. Now, let's think about what actually hinders this process. The first problem that engineering teams often face when working on their MVP is being pulled away from working on core product logic by infrastructure needs, such as updating dependencies or two third-party components just not working together. And the second problem you'll often face is that you spend a large amount of your time poring over large amounts of documentation or looking things up on Stack Overflow as you just try to debug issues that seem simple but turn into their own beasts. Now, we believe that AMP is a great tool to help you get started working on your MVP because it solves these problems. And let's see why. Now, the increasing number of web technologies that are up for offer have made the learning curve for web development incredibly steep. But since AMP pages are essentially HTML pages with limited CSS and JavaScript, they help reduce the time that an engineering team spends ramping up on a project. And this allows them to focus on one thing and one thing only, the product and the product's users. And we, in fact, help you along this process a little bit more by helping make really hard web development concepts easier to deploy on AMP pages. And one example of this is this push these days for websites to merge the speed, the performance, and the offline capabilities offered by apps with the meritocracy and the easy access that is provided by the web. And one way that developers do this is by using progressive web apps, or PWAs. Now, PWAs essentially harness the power of service workers to provide great offline experiences to users, regardless of their network strength, their device, etc. Now, usually, setting up a service worker is really hard. However, when you actually think about service workers in relation to other frameworks, that's another beast to understand altogether. But as Malta mentioned yesterday, we're releasing something called One-Line Service Worker, a tool that promotes your AMP pages to a fully network-resilient PWA AMP experience, helping boost its performance straight out of the box. And this is how simple it is to get started with a One-Line Service Worker. Right? Within your service worker file, you'll actually import the AMP service worker library, and then you'll initialize it. Now, who here noticed that that's at minimum 2 lines? I did, and I was quite upset. But turns out that there's this really cool short-circuiting trick that you can use to actually make that 1 line. And you can rest easy just like I did. Now let's take a look at what a demo would look like when you do deploy a one-line service worker. Here's an example that we pulled out from amp.dev. It's an art gallery site. It's a pretty good-looking art gallery site, right? It has a great homepage. It has some great images and fonts. And what you can't see here in this demo, because I'm lazy, is it has some great animations as well. And here's what it looks like offline. Not a great homepage, not great fonts, and not great images. Now, if you were on Chrome, the offline Dino experience would make this a little bit better, but nothing is as good as your site. However, when you fix this by deploying a one-line service worker, you get this. Your online and offline experiences are the same, and all it took you was 2 lines. I still can't get over the fact that the one-line service worker is 2 lines. Now, in order to understand how the one-line service worker works and will be helping you, let's see how a site usually evolves into a PWA AMP experience. Right? You've got your phone, you open up the browser, and you enter a URL, which then makes a request. This request is received by your server. Now, usually, you have to host all of your site's resources on this server. This includes your markup, images, fonts, and other assets, but it also includes analytics configurations that you honestly don't really understand, and third-party JavaScript that's just adding bloat to your page. And then your server will respond with all of these resources, and the browser, upon receiving them a little while later, will finally render a page onto the device. Now, let's actually pause to think about what's happening here. Usually, each engineering team that is deploying a product to the web has to wear 2 hats. The first is that of a product engineering team, one that writes the core product logic that is implementing the web app. And the second is that of an infrastructure team, one that ensures that the product is secure, accessible, and up to date with the web development best practices. Now, we on the AMP project believe that we're best suited to take on the hat of the infrastructure team. Why? Because AMP is at its core an infrastructure team that is providing you with the components that create the best user experience, as well as the tools that are needed to create the most performant site. And it does so while abstracting away really painful tasks, such as dependency management and long-term maintenance. And which is why, when you switch to an AMP-first site, you're able to focus on just the product and only ship assets from your server that are specific and custom to your product. And you instead trust the AMP team to act as your infrastructure team and focus on shipping the infrastructure that is needed for your site to not just function, but function performantly, function securely, and function accessibly. And AMP does so by serving the AMP runtime that governs all AMP pages and ensures that we have viewport management and security, but by also serving the components that make up a rich AMP experience. This means that the AMP CDN is helping share the load of the assets that need to be served for your site to function correctly. Now again, when you start to evolve your AMP-first site into a PWA AMP experience, you're once again starting to think about the infrastructure needs of your product. And this is such a shame, since you just trusted the AMP infrastructure team to take on these infrastructure needs, and you were just focusing on the product. But by using AMP's one-line service worker, you're once again able to trust the AMP infrastructure team to handle this bit of logic while still getting the benefits of a network-resilient PWA AMP experience. And to see the one-line service worker in action, you can just go check out amp.dev. Here, the AMP team has deployed the one-line service worker to make it truly network resilient. And this site is a true testament to the fact that you can deploy a service worker to a site that has responsive assets, dynamic content, and complex animations, and still do it easily. And actually, let's take a look at what the amp.dev service worker looked like. Right? They imported the service worker module, and then they initialized the service worker module, as you've seen here. But they also added some other value on top of it to really help move forward the default service worker experience. And so they decided what assets they wanted to cache offline, and they specified a caching strategy. And then they also specified what the offline experience needed to look like. Now let's take a look at another way that AMP makes it easy for an engineering team to get started. Documentation is one of the first places any engineer will revert to when debugging implementation issues. That is after we banged our head against the wall for a bit. And documentation is often hard to understand. It covers the getting started part of any project, but it doesn't actually help you understand how to deal with the complex issues that you're fighting with on a daily basis. Now, AMP documentation is not just filled with examples of how to use AMP extensions in their isolation, but also guides and tutorials on how to create really complex experiences, such as checkout flows, for example. And then this documentation is further localized and internationalized to help large international teams have a shared understanding of the AMP code base. And one example of us getting documentation right is animations. Now, animations are a difficult to grapple topic at best. And the fact that the web has about 3.5 standardized ways of animating a div from left to right doesn't make this topic easy to understand. In fact, how does one animate things? What is a performant animation? And what's the difference between a CSS and a JavaScript animation? Crystal had the same questions and actually put together some excellent resources on how to create simple and complex animations in AMP. And both of these are resources you can find on amp.dev. Now, the AMP project doesn't just create great documentation. We also believe in reducing an engineer's reliance on this documentation. And one example is our Visual Studio Code extension that makes authoring AMP documents really easy by checking your documentation for validation errors as you code along, helping you iterate really quickly. Now, once you've read the documentation, you've written up your MVP, and you've actually validated it, the next step is to scale this MVP into a fully fledged viable product that retains the value of the MVP, but adds some great user experience on top of it. And some of the things that are top of mind for any team at this stage are the fact that as you write more code, you're taking on the responsibility of ensuring that your code meets all of the web development best practices as and when they're discovered. And in fact, these best practices become really hard to maintain as your project goes on and will often lead to a growing tech debt in your project. And secondly, imagine this, right? You're trying to create a product details page, and you found 2 components that work well together in theory. But then you start writing the code, and you realize that their APIs don't just line up together, and so you hack them together, and guess what? 5 months down the line, you'll have more tech debt. And the last and most painful task that any project that needs to keep top of mind is dependency management. As you import more third-party libraries, more components, your infrastructure team needs to start thinking about dependency management actively to make sure your product is secure, is accessible, and even just usable. Now, we believe that AMP can be of great assistance here, and let's see why. The one benefit that AMP provides you over other frameworks is the guarantee that all AMP components meet a certain benchmark of performance, accessibility, internationalization, and security by default. And the AMP team guarantees that the code we produce reflects the best UI practices as and when they're discovered. And one example of this is our ability to ensure that all components released meet high accessibility standards. Now, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that are set out by the W3C set out this tiered criteria to measure how accessible your site is. And by at least maintaining a WCAG AA rating, you're best set up to meet the accessibility standards of your country. Now, this could be Section 508 in the US, EN 301 guidelines in the EU, or the relevant accessibility laws right here in Japan. Now, AMP components go through extensive accessibility audits by the UI and Accessibility Working Group, which allows us to ensure that all AMP components enable you to meet not just WCAG AA compliance, but go one step further and help you meet AAA compliance as well. Now, we also have the Performance Working Group that is responsible for monitoring and improving AMP's performance for all AMP pages. And members of the Performance Working Group, for example, are the ones who worked hard on making the one-line service worker a reality. And it's through work like this that the AMP project ensures that not only do we perform optimally on our end, but that we also provide you with the tools that are necessary to make your site performant. And another way that AMP helps you create great user experiences is by leveraging AMP's working groups. Now, AMP consists of working groups, as you've heard, that specialize in creating great experiences within their domain. And this gives AMP an edge in being able to ensure that all of AMP's offerings work well with each other and help you create great end-to-end experiences. And a large part of our process here is actually facilitated by our design review and our intent process. Now, design reviews allow us to ensure that all concerned working groups are able to use their experience within their domain to ensure that all components that are shipped by the AMP project are performant, accessible for the user, but also profitable for businesses and developers. And a large part of this design review process is seeded by our intent process, where any contributor wanting to ship ship or deprecate something has to document their thought process so that all stakeholders have the relevant information needed to make an informed decision. And the last way we help you create great user experiences is by actually just helping you offload some really painful tasks, such as dependency management. Now, like I mentioned before, AMP is at its core an infrastructure team. It helps provide engineering teams with tools to offload other tasks, such as dependency management and other compliance that is needed. And a lot of this is made possible by our infrastructure working group. Our infrastructure working group ensures that all packages used within AMP are always updated. And this allows developers to gain productivity by allowing them to just focus on their core product logic and offloading these painful tasks, which can usually be a huge expense in terms of time and money. Now, speaking of dependency management and actually keeping things up to date, a large part of AMP's value proposition, like Malta mentioned in the keynote yesterday, is that we have an evergreen release where every week we update the runtime that governs AMP, as well as the components that help create a great AMP experience. This allows us to offer cutting-edge updates and features to all developers using AMP. And how are we able to do this? The first way we ensure that our code is of the highest quality is by creating a really strong infrastructure that allows us to create end-to-end integration tests that thoroughly check how components work in isolation, as well as with other components. Next, we also automate as many tests as possible on our end to make sure that we're catching issues as we iterate on code. And the third way that we ensure that we ship only high-quality code is by making sure that we cut a canary with all code the week before we cut a production release. This way, partners that are using AMP can actually test their sites and their use cases against the AMP runtime and add their feedback to our heavily QA'd process. And at this point, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who does opt into the canary. It really helps us gain incredibly valuable feedback, and your friendly AMP infrastructure team really appreciates the feedback you're giving. Now, because I can't stay on stage for more than 30 minutes, and because there's a coffee break right after, let's just say that the AMP infrastructure working group works a lot more to make sure that AMP's releases are always stable, secure, and offer you the most cutting-edge features. Now, let's take a look at the last stage in a product development lifecycle, and the most painful stage. It's long-term maintenance. Now, if you asked any engineer, they would tell you that their code doesn't age gracefully. It's quite the opposite, in fact. And why is this the case? First, as you start using a component from one project and then you add in another component from a different project, you realize that they don't work together. And then you don't really know where to file an issue, and so that languishes forever, and eventually you'll hack around it, but later one of these components will change their API, and once again you'll have to hack around your code. All of this is leading to increasing amounts of tech debt in your project. And secondly, while adding in best practices at the start of a project is a hard task, folding in best practices over the duration of a project is a much more difficult task, in fact. And this is why engineering teams will, towards the end of their project, usually just scrap their entire project and start a whole bunch of refactoring. And this is how AMP helps here. We do so by maintaining a close feedback loop with developers using AMP through conferences like the AMP Conf, or through AMP roadshows, or through GitHub. Now, we believe that we do a great job in releasing high-quality components that help developers get the job done. But we also make sure that we have this close feedback loop so that we can make sure that we're improving our offerings in the long run as well. And let's take a look at some of this feedback loop that we've had with developers deploying AMP experiences. Now, the first example of this is us implementing element-level infinite scroll. This feature is incredibly useful for users because it helps create an engaging experience by making sure they don't have to click for more content. Now, this work was actually kicked off by members of Pinterest engineering team based on their experience creating infinite scroll for Pinterest. And then the AMP UI working group picked up this work and built it into AMP List in close partnership with AliExpress and other partners who were part of our origin trial process. And because of this process, gave us near real-time feedback as they deployed infinite scroll onto their sites. Now, at this point, again, I'd like to take the chance to thank everyone who does opt into our origin trial process for working so closely with us and being such a rich source of actionable feedback. Now, we believe that regardless of what vertical you're using AMP for, be it publishing or e-commerce, two of the most important things for your users to be able to do is find content quickly and then take action on that content quickly. And this is where autocomplete becomes the bread and butter for creating a great search and form-filling experience. Now, we originally had an example of how you could create a great autocomplete experience on amp.dev. And this used the magic of amp bind and amp list. However, that didn't fully express the powers of an autocomplete feature because it missed things like type ahead, client-side filter, etc. Which is why we're excited to announce that we're working hard on releasing a new component called AMP Autocomplete. Now, members of the UI working group are actually working on creating this component and drew up this demo, where you can actually see how far two airports are. Now, it turns out that AMP Conf has traveled 5,789 miles east since our last AMP Conf in Amsterdam. And if you want to find out where the next AMP Conf is, please find Paul, and then let me know what the answer is. Now, we have over time received a large amount of feedback regarding AMP Carousel. And we hear you. And as Andrew mentioned in his talk yesterday, we're working on releasing a new set of carousel primitives that help developers address real business use cases with great ease. And some of these use cases are a news gallery that helps you really highlight the powerful images that accompany a news article, a homepage carousel that allows you to quickly highlight the new information on a site, a product gallery that will help users understand more about the product they're about to buy, related lists to help keep the user engaged, as well as other experiences such as recipes, etc., that rely on a horizontally scrolling div. Now, we're working hard on AMP Carousel, and we promise to have it ready for you very soon. Now, switching gears to how developers serve AMP pages. AMP Toolbox App Optimizer actually currently helps you generate transformed AMP pages that offer a better loading experience for AMP pages that aren't served from the cache. However, publishing transformed AMP pages has been incredibly tedious because they're considered invalid AMP by the validator. Now, as was mentioned on the TSC panel yesterday, I'm also excited to announce that we're starting to work on ensuring that the AMP validator will support the validation of all transformed AMP pages. And once this is launched, publishers can choose to publish transformed AMP pages in a paired AMP approach or in an AMP-first approach, while making sure they get great performance even if their documents aren't served from the cache. And speaking of loops, let's actually close the loop on one-line service worker by talking about some upcoming features. The first is an ability to force an update for the service worker if you believe that the deployment has gone wrong. And the second is the ability to automatically deliver optimized AMP pages from the service worker, which really helps given the change we're making to AMP Toolbox Optimizer. Now, one of the best decisions an engineering team can make is picking a technology stack that helps make dealing with growing tech debt easy by helping you stay on the correct path. By using AMP, engineering teams can leverage the learnings of all engineers that are contributing to the AMP project. And you get these learnings for free. And these learnings are actually informed by not just bugs that are being filed or features that are being raised, but also as the team incrementally iterates incrementally improves the experience offered in AMP based off of experimentation or research that is conducted by our great team. And these improvements are then offered to your product's end users without any involvement from your engineers. Now, let's take a look at how AMP helps you fold in web development best practices for free. The first way we do this is by working closely with standard bodies to ensure that engineers who are using AMP are always getting cutting-edge technology fast. And one of the projects that we're really excited about working with is Animation Worklet. It is something that allows you to write programmatic stateful animations that will still run at the device's native frame rate. And this will help you create jank-free smooth animations. Now, we're currently working with the Chromium project to actually deploy Animation Worklet under the hood for all of our scroll-bound animations. And this means that all position-bound animations will be running jank-free on our worker thread soon. Now, we've also been iteratively making changes to AMP components that are already released. And some of these are images and Lightbox Gallery. And let's see some of the improvements we've been making to this. Now, one problem that developers often face when creating a really responsive site is dealing with responsive assets. And in the attempt to actually provide a great experience to users, what developers will often do is load unnecessarily large images for very small devices. Now, we've been making improvements to AMP image so that developers are always downloading the right size image for all devices, which makes image loading much faster on mobile devices. Another problem that our team observed was that currently images are seen as static content that can't really be interacted with. In fact, rich images with great detail are hard to engage with on small devices such as mobile phones. And which is why the AMP team will now automatically add the lightbox attribute to all images where it makes sense. This means users can tap on this image to interact with it and see the great rich details that publishers have been and the great details on images that photographers have worked really hard on. And then while the content is in lightbox mode, we're incorporating more app-like polishes for all AMP pages, which will help increase the delight of using an AMP page for your user. And one example of this is us improving our swipe to dismiss interaction so that we are reducing the jarringness when the image is transitioning from lightbox mode to the inlined article. Now, another project that the AMP team has taken on is that of refreshing our loaders. Now, currently, while you're waiting for content to appear, you'll see these 3 dots for all content, except for ads, where you'll see the ad badge. Now, if you haven't seen them, don't worry. That's a good thing. You have great network speed. But not everyone does. And we interviewed people who interacted with the web and realized that these loaders neither created the perception of speed, nor did they make our users happy. And so we've been working on revamping our loaders. Now, the first loader that you see here is one that will be rendered for all AMP components, regardless of what it is. It could be iframe, lists, or carousels. The second loader that you see here is our revamped ads loader. And the third, and the one that I'm the most excited about, is a content-aware loader that will help your users understand what kind of content to expect. Now, here you can see the Pinterest badge indicating that the content about to load is an AMP Pinterest embed. And we'll also scale these to other content such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Now, we're very excited, and we're hoping to get these new loaders to you soon. And speaking of loaders, while AMP components are being loaded, they currently display this static loading indicator, as you can see. However, this creates an immediate jump from the indicator to the fully rendered component. And this is usually really jarring for users, especially if they're on slow network speeds. Which is why we're adding a new mechanism, whereas we'll transition from a blurry image to a full-sized image to help reduce the jarringness of actual content being loaded. Now, this was a whirlwind tour of all the components that AMP has to offer that will help you stay on the well-lit path by folding in web development best practices into AMP. Now, let's take a look at that product lifecycle again. AMP helps your engineering team create and then validate your minimum viable product with great ease by allowing you to focus solely on product development. Then, as your MVP evolves into a fully validated product, AMP works with you to make sure that this version of the product not only serves users' needs, but provides them a delightful experience. And then once this product is out into market, AMP lightens the load of long-term maintenance for this product by helping you iteratively fold in web development best practices while having to offload really painful tasks such as dependency management. And all in all, I have demonstrated to you that AMP is a valuable tool for all engineering teams, and this means that you're excited about using AMP and have questions. So to learn more about all the content that I have shared with you, you can first of all go to the design and the UX booth if you want to engage with our amazing UX designers and researchers who work on the AMP project. Now, as was mentioned yesterday, we're incredibly eager to chat with developers about their experience with AMP and just learn about your thoughts. And if you have questions about how to make your site interactive and performant, you can go to the interactivity and performance booth, where folks from the UI and accessibility working group, as well as the performance working group, will be eager to chat with you. And with that, I first wanted to just thank all the members of the AMP project, especially those from the UI and accessibility working group and the performance and infrastructure working group who have made this all possible. I'm here merely as a messenger communicating their incredible hard work. And also thank you to you sitting here, as well as folks on the live stream, for allowing me to share this incredibly exciting narrative with all of you. I hope you have a lovely rest of the conference, and thank you.